Hall of Fame is a place that honors people that are exceptional at what they do. It exists to remind future generations of the greatness of these people from the past. Did you know that God has a Hall of Fame to remember the extraordinary people of faith who were written about in the Old Testament? And we can find that Hall of Fame in the New Testament of the Bible. Hebrews 11 tells us that faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. This faith is what gave people in the old days great fame. This faith is what puts them in God's Hall. The Faithful Hall of Fame, Hebrews 11. Abel! So this is Abel. Abel is in the Hall of Fame because he was famous for his faith and he gave his best to God. Now, God created the whole earth. God created the first man, whose name was Adam. Adam and Eve had two sons, named Cain and Abel. When they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. When it was time for the harvest, Cain and Abel wanted to show their love and thanks to God, so they brought him an offering. Abel gave the strongest and fattest sheep he had. God was very happy with Abel. God said that Abel was righteous because he brought him the very best that he had to give. Hebrews 11. Enoch. So this is Enoch. Enoch is in the Hall of Fame because he pleased God. Enoch was the great-great-great-great-grandson of Adam and Eve. Enoch was the father of Methuselah and many other sons and daughters. You see, Enoch lived as a good friend with God for his whole life. Enoch lived for 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then, one day, he disappeared. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying, because he pleased God. Hall of Fame, Hebrews 11. Noah! This is Noah. Noah is in the Hall of Fame because he trusted God. God told Noah to build an ark for his family and the animals to live on during the flood. When the ark was ready, God told Noah to load everyone into the large boat. They entered in pairs, each with another of its kind. After 7 days, it started to rain. The underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights and then stopped. Many days later, Noah sent out a dove to find dry land, but the dove came back. After 7 days, Noah sent out the dove again, and it returned with a branch. After 7 more days, Noah released the dove again. This time, it did not return. This made Noah think the dove found dry land where it could rest. Noah lifted the covering of the boat and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. Noah trusted in God's plan, and God protected his family during the flood. Abraham. This is Abraham.
Hey.
When Abraham was younger, he was known as Abram.
Oh.
Abram lived in a place called Haran. One day, God told Abram, "Leave your home with your family and go to a place that I will show you."
Ah.
So Abram traveled with his wife Sarai, their nephew Lot, and the rest of their family. The new land that they made home was crowded. Abram said to Lot, "Let's not fight. Is the whole land not before us? Let's split up. You go one way, and I will go the other way."
Aha.
So Lot looked to the left and to the right. He saw that the land of Jordan was well taken care of, so Lot chose to go the way that looked better to him. He took his family and they settled in the beautiful land, near the town of Sodom. Abram took his family and they moved the other way. Then one day, God said to Abram, "Look up. All the land you see will be blessed. I will give it to you and your family forever." Abram received the promise and the blessing because he was faithful. So this is Abraham.
Hey.
Abraham had a nephew named Lot. He lived in the land of Jordan, which was near a city called Sodom. Unfortunately, the people who lived in Sodom did wicked things. God told Abraham that he was going to destroy the city of Sodom. Abraham pleaded with God for the people in Sodom. He asked God that if he could find at least 10 people that were not wicked, that God would promise not to destroy the city. God sent 2 angels to the city of Sodom. The angels searched for at least 10 people who were not sinning against God, but there were none. The angels told Lot that God was going to destroy the city. They told Lot to gather his family and leave the city. But Lot took a long time. He waited until it was almost too late. The angels grabbed their hands and pulled him and his family out of the city. They told Lot and his family to not turn back, but to keep going. Then God sent fire and it rained down on the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. The whole city was destroyed. Lot's wife disobeyed the angels and turned around. She immediately became a pillar of salt. Lot and his family were safe because they obeyed and left with the angels. God showed mercy and kept Abraham's family safe. Hall of Fame, Sarah. This is Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's wife. One day, as Abraham sat near the entrance of his tent, God appeared to him. Abraham looked up and 3 men stood before him. God promised Abraham that he and Sarah would someday have a son. In fact, God promised Abraham that he would have many children. Even more than the stars in the sky. Now, Sarah was very old when God made this promise. When she heard that God promised to give her a child, she laughed. The messenger of God stopped Sarah. He asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah chose to trust God, and she became pregnant and she gave birth to a son. The son's name was Isaac. God's promises came true for Abraham and Sarah. Abraham became the father of many nations, and from his child came children, and from their children, more children, until Abraham's descendants were truly more numerous than the stars in the sky. Abraham and Sarah trusted God for the promise and believed that God was faithful. Hall of Fame, Joseph. This is Joseph, who's the son of Israel and Rachel. Joseph was the most loved of all his brothers, so his brothers hated him. After being sold into slavery and put in jail, Joseph found favor with the Pharaoh and ruled over all of Egypt. He helped Egypt thrive during 7 years of abundance, and then he was prepared for 7 years of famine because God had helped Joseph to understand the Pharaoh's dreams about what would happen to Egypt. Now during this time, Joseph's brothers came to seek his help, and after testing them, Joseph told them who he was, and he forgave his brothers for all the trouble they had put him through. But Joseph had not seen his father for many years. So he sent for Israel and his brothers' families. Together they all traveled to the land of Egypt, where Joseph would provide for them in the famine. Pharaoh allowed Joseph and all his brothers to settle in one of the best parts of Egypt. And finally, Joseph was reunited with his father. Joseph lived 110 years and saw 3 generations of his family flourish in the land. Before Joseph died, he told his brothers of the future of Egypt. He told them of the exodus that would take place, meaning that they would all return to the promised land of their father Israel, his father Isaac, and his father Abraham. He made his brothers promise that when they left the land of Egypt, they would take his bones with them and bury them in the promised land. Joseph always lived with hope that God would deliver him and his people. Though many people meant to show him harm throughout his life, God meant it all for good, so that many people should live because of his faith. Full Hall of Fame, Moses. This is Moses, who was an Israelite boy born in a time when Israelite boys were not supposed to live. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of Pharaoh. You see, Moses lived in Egypt, and the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians. But God had a plan for his people and Moses. Moses was adopted into the Pharaoh's family and grew up in the Egyptian palace. By faith, Moses refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share in the pain of his people rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. When Moses had grown up, he made a big mistake and fled Egypt for fear that he would be killed. He came to live with the Midianites for many years. One day, God spoke to Moses through a burning bush and called him back to Egypt to fulfill his plan. But Moses was afraid and didn't think he was the right man for the job. So God gave Moses his brother Aaron as a helper. So Moses went back to Egypt. He and Aaron asked Pharaoh to let God's people go. After much hardship due to the Pharaoh's hardened heart, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and towards the promised land. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing Pharaoh's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. It was by faith that the people of Israel went through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. And then God's people wandered in the desert for many years, even though the way to the promised land only took a few days. While wandering in the desert, God gave the Israelites food to eat.
What's that?
And water to drink, and was with them as they made their way to the promised land. God gave them many other laws and rules to live by to keep them safe and to set them apart as his own people. He gave them 10 commandments about how they should live. Through it all, God took care of his people and used his servant, Moses, to accomplish his faithful Hall of Fame, Rahab. This is Rahab. Rahab lived in the town of Jericho in the Promised Land. Rahab was not an Israelite, and she made bad choices. But God had a plan for Rahab, even though she was a sinner.
All right.
Now God told his people, the Israelites,
Hey, that's us.
to go into the Promised Land. So Joshua sent 2 spies to search the land around the city of Jericho. The 2 spies came to Rahab's house to stay the night. But the king of Jericho heard that there were spies in his city, so he sent orders for Rahab to bring them out. But Rahab hid the spies
Bring him out, you hear?
and told the king's men that it was true that the men were at her house, but she did not know where they were now.
I don't know. But
She told the king's men to go quickly to find the spies, because they could not have gone far.
go now.
Oh, right.
So the king's men rushed out to the city in pursuit of the Israelite spies. All the while, the Israelites hid on Rahab's roof. So Rahab went to them and said, I know the Lord has given you this land. We have heard of the great acts that God has done for you. Your God is the God of all the heavens and the earth. So please swear to me that you will be kind to my family. The spies agreed to this, and Rahab helped them escape from the city. Before they left, they told Rahab to tie a scarlet rope to the window.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oops.
This rope would serve as a mark for Rahab's house and would remind the Israelites of their promise to her.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And so the spies were on their way. For 3 days they hid from the king's men who were looking for them. Finally, they returned to Joshua and told them all they had seen. Rahab was remembered for her faithfulness. Hall of Fame, Joshua. This is Joshua.
Oh, hey.
Joshua was the leader of the Israelites, who God used to bring his people to the promised land.
Yeah, let's do this.
When God told Joshua it was time to take the promised land, Joshua sent spies into the city of Jericho. While those spies were in Jericho,
Come on.
they were protected by a woman named Rahab. The spies promised to spare Rahab and her family when they took back the land.
Yay.
And she hung a scarlet cord from her window to remind them of their promise.
See you soon.
Now the Israelites had crossed the Jordan and were camped near the town of Jericho.
Hey, hello.
One day Joshua looked up,
Huh?
and there was a man standing before him.
Hello.
The man said, I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Joshua asked what the man wanted to tell him, and the Lord said he wanted Joshua to take the city of Jericho,
All right.
but that Joshua needed to follow his instructions exactly.
You got it.
Jericho was shut for fear of the Israelites.
Anyone home? Yeah, well.
No one came out and no one came in. So the Lord told Joshua to gather his soldiers and march around the city for 6 days.
Mary.
The priests were to take the Ark of the Covenant, and 7 priests were to go in front of it, blowing a ram's horn. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times and blow the horn. Then all the people of Israel were to give a great shout,
Then what?
and then the city walls would fall.
Whoa! Yeah, let's do it.
So Joshua said, Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the people did shout. And the walls did fall.
Let's go!
The Israelites overtook the city of Jericho as God had commanded.
Rahab.
They remembered Rahab because of her faithfulness. Joshua was faithful in carrying out God's commands, and the Israelites took many other cities as God told them they would.
Oh, nice.
For God will never fail to fulfill his promises. So the Israelites came to live in the land that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, Israel, Joseph, and Moses many years ago.